Hi, everybody. This is Chris West from House Calls Vermont. Welcome to this interview we're going to have. We have a special guest today. We have Paul Lesure from, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. You can correct me a second, Paul. He's the president of Green Mountain Solar, which is a New England-based solar company. They have offices throughout New England, including in Vermont. They are members of the Home Builders Association. And full disclosure, I just had a solar system installed by Green Mountain Solar, and I was very happy with the entire process. So I'm a little biased at this particular moment, but we're actually inviting Paul on to talk about the whole concept of net zero energy, what net zero is, what's going on in the photovoltaic world, what's going on with subsidies, and the move towards what they're calling decarbonized grid, and what the infrastructure changes are going to be needed if we're going to have everybody charging and using the net to charge their cars and run their houses full electric. So welcome, Paul. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So I know Jim
Excellent.
has some initial questions. I don't want to get in the way. I just want to give him the floor for the beginning.
So, Paul, some of the questions I had, what can our infrastructure at this point in time technically handle if everybody switched over to electrification? Chris, I believe it's, what is her name, Cronenberg or Passive House Institute?
Katrine
We did
Klingberg. Yeah.
Klingberg. And we did an interview with her, Chris did, and she basically said if everyone switched over to electric cars at this point in time and really tried to electrify everything and switching away from carbonized type of fuel sources, then or carbon based, we would then end up having the infrastructure wouldn't be able to support it. And in fact, New York Times has said that if everybody switched over just to electric vehicles at this point in time, you would need 25% more at a minimum power requirements to flow through our grid, and it's not able to handle that. So there's got to be a way for that shortfall without building a bunch more power plants. For renewables to take up some of that slack. And so with being somebody who's in this, quite deeply, it's your profession, what do you see as not just the capacity, but some of the innovations that are coming forward in photovoltaics, some of the current, requirements, or not requirements, availabilities of what they can offer, granted what size array it may take to support the needs of a house, but also when that house now has an EV, being powered by that, and possibly mini splits and everything else. So where do you see things currently, Paul, with respect to photovoltaics and, some of these current needs of Vermonters?
Yeah, so I think you're right. We're looking at a two-sided equation with the grid. The grid has largely been the same as long as its existence. We've expanded it out, and it's been largely a one-way street. We've flexed it at times to get a little bigger, like in the 70s when we thought nuclear power was going to make everything so cheap that we wouldn't even need to meter it. And then
Sure.
It declined again. We're now on that upswing. To be honest, we're going to have to make changes to the grid to accommodate future things, but we've already really needed that as well. So things, for flexing that grid, like substations and more wires are going to be necessary, transformers at people's houses. But we look at, photovoltaics and, also energy storage devices such as batteries as a great option
Sure.
to help mitigate that. So by adding those photovoltaics to those lines, what you're doing is you're distributing that now power production on that. So, I have solar at my house. The excess power I produce is probably being picked up by my neighbors on either side of me, or even just a couple houses down at best.
Sure.
So what it's going to do is help hopefully distribute that energy across the line and not have to think about so much as a one point source. What we can also do is start to look at the energy storage technology and have batteries take up some of that load. So what they can do, not only just backup, but self-consumption mode. So we can work with that to have that battery flexing how it works with the grid. So when you're producing, if there's extra space in that battery, it's actually pulling some of that in. But then if you have high drop periods in the afternoon, at night, wherever, it can also help cover some of your house's loads, so you might not be straining the grid as much.
And that's something that's called, if I believe, if I have the term right, microgrid, right? We're talking about, instead of having a couple of large producers all putting electrons into the net, we're talking about having distributed production. You have a PV system at your house, I have a PV system at my house, I have solar batteries backup, you have solar battery backup. We can all be used as part of this expanded production and storage capacity for the entire network.
Yes. So microgrid's not quite the right term, because when you get to microgrids, and this is a little above my level, I will admit, microgrids can operate on their own. So right now, a large portion of the grid, again, it's a one-way street. If you lose part of it, it all goes out. Whereas a microgrid, it can self-sustain. This is more just having distributed energy resources across the line, so that they're just supporting with little bits of power generation along the way, helping to boost voltage. So as there's more and more draw, hopefully that's supporting it. And we've seen that, um, sunny summer days are some of the greatest example, where everyone's kicking up their AC, but also the sun is shining, so power's hitting the lines, and that offers a great savings, because we're not then having to use peaker plants and other really expensive fuel sources to send more power out on that line. And
And
it's also helped.
just to clarify, what a peaker plant is.
Sure. So peaker plant is designed to just really kick in when power is needed the most. Um, they're often horribly inefficient plants and expensive. So down in Bow, New Hampshire, there's a coal peaker plant. It gets paid astronomical amounts to just sit there. It's like $1 million a month. But when the New Hampshire grid needs it, what happens is it actually kicks on and they send that power out to the grid, but the utilities are probably charging 47 plus cents per kilowatt hour
Wow.
just to have that. And it's just covering those big spike events.
Right.
So again, where everyone is turning on their AC in summer to cool their house down, that's when a peaker plant comes on. The rest of the time, nighttime, mornings where loads aren't that big, that plant is shut down.
Yeah.
We have them in Vermont, and they tend to be, fuel sources like, often fossil fuels. So coal, natural gas, propane, other things like that, where they can kick on it as an intermittent resource.
So as a Vermonter, if I'm looking into solar as an option, and will most locations, provided the exposure is correct, because we know that there are other companies out there that will put your panels anywhere in the house to be able to get the tax credits. But that really doesn't help what we're trying to do, because there is a balance, there has to be, but between the need, the cost, the return on investment, and what are you going to do to generate enough power? And if that's on the wrong side of the house and you're putting more infrastructure in, thus the cost goes up. So with that right now, where are we, and what would you suggest to a Vermonter to consider?
Yeah, so we do site assessments, because you're right, every home is very specific. As you guys as home builders, you couldn't quote a kitchen by just having the person give you a phone call and say, I want granite countertops and maple cabinets. Sure. That doesn't give you much. So we want to come out to the house. We want to look at what your best roof surfaces are, or maybe you don't have much of an option, and we look at a ground mount. We then also look at what your electric bill is. We'll talk to you about what you have for plans. Maybe there's an EV in your future. You're looking to do mini splits so you can get off, oil, natural gas, whatever. You have a kid going off to college, and you're not going to be paying for their laundry and showers anymore. And so we're going to really try to figure out that load, and then we can design a system to meet that. So we can take a shade analysis, tell exactly how much sun that prime location for you gets, use the panels we have to figure out, okay, if they need X amount of kilowatt hours, it's this amount of panels, and design that system to meet your needs on site. And we do the same thing with the battery. We'll look at what your potential loads are, how much you need to cover that, and then we will size the battery appropriately, so that when you're on grid or the grid goes down, you still have power.
Yeah. So one of the terms that is always kind of a tricky term is the net zero house, right? And
Yeah.
what we mean by net zero and what we need to hit a net zero. So I bought a 1976 raised ranch in 1999, and I super insulated it, which brought the load down significantly. So I was able to heat and cool my house, although cooling isn't quite as important, with heat pumps. And I have 2 heat pumps, and that covers, I have no fossil fuels directly attached to the house. It's all electric. And we did buy an electric vehicle 3 years ago. So
Awesome.
we also had a number of years of historical data to show the difference. We were at about 12,000 kilowatt hours per year, and with the EV, and that added about 4,000 kilowatt hours per year, which is pretty standard, right? That's a standard number people throw out there.
Yep.
But there's a house right around the corner that has a system that's half the size of mine, and they're net zero-ish because they're still using fossil fuels for their heating and their domestic hot water. So what have you heard as the definition of a net zero house, and how do you view that?
Yeah. So predominantly the definition of net zero has to focus around the energy that house consumes from outside. Some will focus much more on the carbon neutrality of it. But predominantly it's a house that kind of sustains itself, or so that could be, like your house where you're powering it with your solar system, and then that's running your heat pumps, your your stove, your refrigerator, all that other things. You're not bringing in an outside energy source. My house, I have an 1840s farmhouse.
I'm
Jim's
sorry.
actually
I'm
coming.
sure it's beautiful.
Oh, it is lovely.
It is. It has its nuances, but I've been working to bring that net zeros too. So, before it was a oil sucking machine, I was going through 500 plus gallons a year. So I did the same thing. I insulated my entire basement. I replaced all my windows. I did re-insulated my roofs. I've been able to switch over to heat pumps. I've been able to switch over to solar. Now the only outside energy source I have is propane for my gas cooktop, which is one of my last vices. It just cooks better.
Although Jim, I sold Jim on induction cooktops when he redid his
No,
house.
he coerced me. He shamed me, and now I try to do the same for others because I enjoy it so much. As long as you don't drop a glass spice jar on the edge of that glass cooktop, because that gets expensive.
Yeah,
So
you have to replace the entire top.
well, that goes into my next question, Paul, is the fact of, so many customers, when they talk to us about weatherization projects and everything else, what's the ROI? Well, that's hard to put that into complete parenthetical statements and say, this is exactly going to be what you're going to have for return on investment, because there's so many factors involved. Are you going to start using more energy? Because, hey, I've done this work and it's cheap, and let me just turn up the thermostat. We've had that happen for people, or leave a few more lights on because it's free. That's part of the consideration, behavioral considerations.
Oh, yeah.
But with that, I'm also thinking about the fact of everything has a life cycle, and I would like to say that these things we put in place will last forever, but there's going to be a diminishing return at some point. So if you could speak to both of those, because it's not just the initial payment, where's the life expectancy once that return on investment has been reached? What is the next expectation for consumers?
Yeah. So with solar, we can give ROI because we're creating a solid output. We know that, hey, this system is designed and it's going to produce an average of 10,000 kilowatt hours a year.
Sure.
At this value. Here you go, which makes our job nice. I totally respect the weatherization field, where I know all the work I've done in my house has been an amazing difference, but it's hard to put dollars and cents on that.
Sure.
As for the life expectancy, solar's been around for a lot longer than people think. We all think, well, like, oh, we started seeing it in 2008, but the first solar cells were created in the 50s, I think. Before really we started pushing it in the 60s and 70s for NASA, so that they could power things in space. it was really 2008, 2009, where it took off, as an average option for residential consumers.
Okay.
That being said, we also have products that have solid guarantees on it. So one of our main products, not to brand drop, but like LG, has a guarantee that at year 25, most of their panels would be guaranteed to be at least 90.6% of their original value.
Nice.
So for every 100 watts that panel produces, that's 90.6 you're still getting.
Sure.
So for a lot of customers, if that's going to, still meet your needs, then after year 25, let it ride. Yeah. It'll degrade continually by 0.4% or less per year after that.
Sure.
But, rather than just pitching it and getting a new one, maybe just add one or two more panels to the system and keep it going.
Oh, excellent.
So we're looking at a reasonable expectation that after 50 years, we're still talking about an 80% output from the original installed, capacity.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Just questioning. I mean, I like your recommendation to add more panels later. A few more panels here and there. Do you ever sell up front if you can net meter, saying this is what you need, but if you can net meter, and then your system will still be producing what you need, 40 years out, 50 years out? I mean, I'm just curious.
We will talk with customers rather than going to 100%, and trying to match it perfectly. We typically are going to oversize it ever so slightly because we know that degradation is going to be there. So oftentimes, if that extra panel gets you to 104% or 105%, we'd like to go there. That way, as you get that degradation, you're still a little ahead. That being said, we don't oversell drastically. The problem being, in Vermont, the utility is never going to write you a check for your excess power.
Sure.
So if we start to oversize it, you lose that value.
Understood.
But we have had some customers who will oversize their system to, again, say, well, right now, this is what I need, but I'm going to get an electric car or a heat pump, or, we have plans. So build it X% bigger. So I have that. And then they're just accepting that little bit of risk of, well, I will lose some of my energy credits, but that's okay to them.
Yeah. So tell me, if I was to buy a system, I mean, I happen to just get under the cutoff for this year for the kilowatt payback for energy that I produce that I'm not using. If I was to buy a system right now today in Vermont, what is the agreement with the powers that be on my produced kilowatt hours that I sell to the grid?
Sure. So as we had the net metering change on September 1st. So what the agreement is now, and I'll just use GMP rates because that's a bulk of the state. But you get 1 cent less than the state's base rate. So GMP, which again dictates many of the other utilities, their state base rate, I believe right now is 16.8 cents. So you're going to get 15.8 for everything you produce. Unfortunately, GMP, right after that base rate was set, asked for an additional rate hike. So you would be paying them 17.7 cents for everything you produce,
right?
But getting the 15.8.
Right.
So it's about a 10% delta. But what we would do, since we're talking monetary credits, is oversize that system slightly. So we're going to aim to offset, or produce enough kilowatt hours to offset that 17.7 rate. So let's say we were to have, since it's a 10 cent or 10% difference, have someone who's using 1,000 kilowatt hours a year for easy math, we would try to produce 1,100, and that should 1-to-1 their bill.
Right.
One thing that I like to consider is the story I had at it was actually the log home show that Efficiency Vermont asked me to do. They first said, okay, we just want you to go sit in our booth, and they didn't tell me what show it was. And it was the log home show. It's like, oh, please, because a lot of failures there. But with that, a lady came up and she wanted to tell me how she had this excellent geothermal system that she just put in that was like $50,000, excuse me, and then a $40,000 solar array for backup. Because I said, if that doesn't heat your water, it's going to go to electric resistance heating. Oh, I'm not worried about that because I just put in $40,000 worth of solar. I said, okay. Have you had an energy audit done? What's that? So, really old home, never did anything to button it up right and create the demand or have it go down, I should say. And like Chris, his is an anomaly, because not every home in Vermont does that kind of a retrofit. We wish they would, but they don't have the capacity for it. So if a standard homeowner that has a house that's current code or less, to meet the needs that they have for electrification for the whole house, including mini splits, being off of fossil fuels completely, maybe an EV, is it realistic to assume that current technology will provide enough for that to happen if you don't have that super insulated house?
It's very case by case basis. I
Sure.
would say 90% of the time we can.
Great.
But it's the structure of the house that matters. So if
Sure.
you have those, like little dog shed dormers everywhere, that takes up a lot of space. So if that's on your south facing roof, we might not be able to offset it.
Oh, as far as putting panels instead of a ground mounted system. Yeah.
Yeah. But again, 90+% of the time we could do it. And panels are getting better and better every single year.
Yeah.
And so, where we, when I started the company 4.5 years ago, we're thinking 325 watt panels were great. We're now installing panels as our base rate of 380, and we have some that go, up into the 400s.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's an interesting point because I wanted to ask you about, I know these are still very far out, but the Perskovite cells, which are now being developed and are probably still another 5 or 10 years from being market ready, they're promising good efficiencies with lower prices. What technologies do you see? Because you're still installing multi-crystalline, polycrystalline cells, which is the industry standard. What do you see as developments coming around the corner for the solar industry on the PV side?
I hate to say it, but I don't look too far out. My vendors are what provide. So we do monocrystalline, silicon cells, and they are still getting better and better. Whether it's the wiring of the cells or the purity of the cells, they're really driving up the wattage. So again, in the last 5 years, we've had over a 20% increase. I do know, some of the Perskovite cells and others are coming along, but I guess I can't speak too much to that.
Okay.
So, with that, what do you see long term? Let's say somebody does have to. Is it? I guess we really haven't been there yet. If we're looking at 2008 for the major push towards most people having this as an option. But I'm always looking at what's the other side of this. What is if this is clean energy, is it clean throughout its life cycle and then either repurposing or whatever? Are these panels something that are just going to be a landfills problem, or do they have
the cradle to cradle question? Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I mean, where are they currently with technology, Paul?
Sure. So there are more and more recycling programs coming together. Renewable Energy Vermont, as well as so they're this kind of industry governing body is working on helping us create a way to have more recycling available. Sure. I apologize. I have a dog running around in the background.
That's okay.
So that we can have these as more of a cradle to cradle. These are traditional electronics basically, and so they could take the metal of the frame and the glass off the panel and the wiring and hopefully recycle them. Right now, that's not readily available in many markets. Fortunately, we don't have too many panels that are, going to be taken off. And much of the time, we're just sending them back to the vendors.
So a question we're often asked is by customers, which we pretty much know the answer, but hey, do I need a new roof before I put these on? I mean, and also, will my roof support these? What about because, in Vermont, our housing stock wasn't always built to proper engineering standards. And, so how do you approach that and the new roof? I mean, from the framing to the protection on the roof?
Sure. So at our solar site assessments, we try to assess all of that. So if it's a, standing seam roof, you're probably in good shape. Those are really durable. We don't penetrate that roof at all. So not a concern. Shingle roofs, we're going to look for signs of wear, the little stone that's on it, is that starting to abrade off? Are they cupping at the corners from UV damage? And then at that point, we would recommend, hey, before we do this, it's a 25-year minimum investment. Like, you should probably replace that rather than us coming back in 3 or 4 years and having to have you pay to take it all down and put it back up.
Yes.
We also try to get into the attic and look for any signs of wear or damage. So is there already rot from leaks? Is the roof tied together well? Are we seeing a truss system, collar ties, or is this some crazy 2x4 at 24-inch spacing roof? And should we be concerned? So we're going to take pictures and do all those assessments. Fortunately, solar doesn't add that much weight to the roof. We're talking usually 3 to 4 pounds per square foot. So the engineering firms we work with, we almost always pass.
Understood. So real quick with that, let's say a customer wants to go forward and they're looking at, okay, I want to do this, but what is my cost? I understand. We're looking for a ballpark in which to play here, and not an exact number, but let's say we have a 2,000 square foot house. We have 3.5 individuals inside that house, and they're looking to do as much as they can with electrification, and they've got great solar exposure. If they're looking at something like this with current rebates from Fed, state, whatever, what do you usually see a ballpark range that people should be looking at for financing?
Ooh, so that's always a tough one. As you guys know, talking about Chris's house and his neighbor's house, it's vastly different because of the insulation work he's done and the electrification.
Sure.
Our average system across the whole spectrum is around $32,000 up front.
Yep.
But if you're electrifying everything, it could be more expensive. The benefit, though, is right now there's a 26% federal tax credit. So it comes right off the top of that when you file your taxes next year. So you're going to pay the full, let's say, again, our average $32,000 to us, but you file your taxes next year. And if you have tax liability to afford it, you can get that credit back. There's also some great financing options through lenders. We use VSCCU a lot. I know they also do great energy efficiency loans, but they will actually help you finance that too, where they'll help pay for the whole amount up front, and then you get 15 months to put that tax credit back in. So it makes it a lot more manageable. And we're often with that coming in right around people's current electric bills, sometimes a little higher depending on the efficiency system.
So you could be looking at a 9 to 15-year payback then.
Yeah, 10 to 15 probably realistic. 10 is like a great site and good Perfect. System. 15 years is much more average.
Sure.
Though looking at an investment that is probably going to be in place and giving you electricity for 50 years, a 15-year payback is still something that I consider to be a good investment. And
it's phenomenal.
Yeah.
I mean, you'll never pay off your utility bill. Whereas
exactly.
Once you go solar, you have a reasonable payback on that time. So anything beyond your, direct payback is gravy.
Yeah. And that was the main reason that we went with this. We're at this point, we're net zero. And although, of course, the conundrum is there's less sun and less access to the sun when I need it the most, I'm going to be overproducing during the summer months. As a matter of fact, just last week, every one of those sunny days, we were hitting our daily usage load with our heat pumps on and everything running and charging the car. And we're in November, which says to me that we're really looking at where we made 30 kilowatt hours a day last week, and that was a great day, and that's pretty much what we use when everything's on and going. So we're really excited. I will say that when I had the people out to do the site analysis, there were a number of points where they said we're going to underestimate the production here. We're gonna say that the leaves are on the trees all year round, which means that, but they're not. So I'm actually the actual on the ground production is going to be higher than what your company's conservative estimates are, and that made me feel comfortable knowing that I would be truly getting the energy that I need to run my house.
Yeah, and we do our best to be conservative. We would rather under promise and over deliver slightly. And so we factor in downtime of system issues, snow, leaves, all that. And overall, we're pretty accurate.
Paul, the one thing I know we're coming up on the end of the interview, but at one time when I first did the assessment at your house, I believe there was a unit out there with a solar tracker, and
Yeah.
at the time I had the information that I had received was that could be a deal breaker for many because of the cost of the solar tracker. And you'd mentioned at that point in time that, hey, listen, what it makes it up for in efficiency by being able to get the proper exposure to the sun and what it can collect would be worthwhile. It's my understanding, though, that more so now you'd be more in favor of promoting either a rooftop or a ground based
So a
system. Fixed unit. So what drives that now currently? What are your thoughts on a solar tracker? Because I know a lot of people do see those and they consider them.
Yeah. I used to work for the company who made those solar trackers, and they're great. It provides probably 2/3 of the solar power we have at my house. What I've seen in the marketplace is a change in the economics. Okay. So panels have gotten so much cheaper than they used to be.
Okay.
In 2008, 2009, panels were the bulk cost of your system. So you were paying $2 a watt or more for that panel. So maximizing that with a tracker was key.
I see.
Currently, we're paying under $1 a watt for the actual panel itself. And so that changes the economics, where spending all that extra money on a high-tech racking system to maximize the panel isn't there. We can do a fixed system or a roof mount, install a couple more panels to offset that efficiency, and you're in great shape. We also find it's just a lot more flexible. Again, trackers are great. The 20 panel tracker I have in my yard fit me well. But if you need 22 panels or 28 panels, there's no way to do that. Whereas I can do any single individual panel I want on a roof, or on my ground mounts, I can do it in 2s and 4s. So it gives us just a lot more flexibility. And then there's, no moving parts.
That's the key for me. I mean, I know the trackers are 30% more efficient overall than a fixed system, but at some point something's going to go, and I'm going to have to repair that. I'm never going to have to do that with my ground mounted fixed system. It's just there. I mean, maybe I can convince my neighbor to let me cut down some trees if they are in trouble. But I love trackers, and trackers are great. But I'm with you on that. I looked at both and decided to go with a fixed system just because of the ease and lack of moving parts.
Yeah, and that's where we've just migrated as a business.
Makes perfect sense. Certainly. Well, Chris, anything else for
No,
you?
I'm good. That was this has been great, Paul. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to come and talk to us. We're going to get this edited and up on our YouTube channel, and we'll be talking about it during the show this weekend. And thank
Awesome.
you so much for taking your time out to talk with us.
Thank you. I really appreciate you guys reaching out and giving me the opportunity to talk about this. It's fantastic stuff. And if there's ever anything else I can do to talk, support you guys, let me know.
Well, I would say one shameless plug is when you're up in that attic and doing that assessment and you see that somebody has a horribly appointed attic, by the way, you might want to call somebody from the EEN to get this thing looked at, just to make sure. That's all I'm saying.
We love it. We're actually members of the EEN.
Perfect.
Because we do heat pumps.
Oh, there you
okay.
go.
Great. Yeah, great.
We're always looking for that. When I bought my house, there was a 2-inch hole through my basement wall, and it was horrifying. So we're not here to sell any more solar than we have to.
Yeah.
Obviously, I like it, but if we can help people save energy, as we, getting back to the beginning, that's probably the biggest thing we can do for the grid and for the world.
Exactly.
And a kilowatt saved is way cheaper than a kilowatt produced.
Yeah.
Well, Chris, we're going to have to flip a coin to see who gets to play Paul on the interview this weekend on the radio. So I'll try to get his voice down if it's going to be me.
There you go. Okay, well, thank you very much, Paul, and we'll look forward to speaking to you again at some point.
Thanks so much.
Okay.
Great. Thanks, Paul.
Bye.
Have a great day.
You too.